All right, well, welcome back. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to our next session entitled International Approaches to Distributed Network Data Systems. My name is Dr. Rachel Hendricks Stirrup, and I'm the Research Director of Real World Evidence at the Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy. I'm very excited to introduce you all to our panelists and discussants for today. We have Daniel Morales with us, who's a senior clinical epidemiologist of Data Analytics and Methods Task Force at the European Medicines Agency, or EMA. We also have joining us online Melissa Campman, who's a manager of Data Analytics and Real World Evidence Division, also Marketed Health Products Directorate at Health Canada. As I mentioned, Melissa is joining us virtually, and you can see her on the screen here in front of us. And lastly, we have David Money, who's the Acting Deputy Director at the Office of Pharmacovigilance and Epidemiology at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. So as we get started, we'll first begin with a brief presentation on DARWIN EU by Daniel. After that, we'll hear brief remarks from Melissa, joining us online, and Dave, before we segue into our brief Q&A or discussion for this session. So with that being said, I'll turn it to Daniel.
Thank you very much. Are the slides available? Perfect. Let's see. Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what's happening in Europe, specifically with regards to DARWIN EU. So DARWIN EU is the EMA's federated network of data and expertise. It works through close collaboration with colleagues at the EMA and the Coordination Center, which is currently based at Erasmus MC. Connected to the Coordination Center are a number of different data partners who maintain their data locally, and it's mapped to the OMOP Common Data Model. And this allows standardized packages that are produced by the Coordination Center to be executed in a federated manner. This figure shows some of the data partners that were onboarded to the first year of DARWIN EU. And unlike Sentinel, we are very much just beginning to walk. We are currently in our second year. The data sources that were onboarded in the first year are a mixture of primary care or electronic healthcare records, hospital electronic healthcare records, administrative claims, some registries, and also a biobank. And the aim is over time to increase the geographical representativeness of the data sources that we have access to in Europe, but also to enrich and duplicate some of the data sources so that we can increasingly run studies on less prevalent diseases, for example, having multiple cancer registries covering different member states. The type of questions that we're looking to answer are those broadly in these three areas to support the planning and validity of applicant studies. In terms of feasibility, that may also be in terms of clinical trials, but also the representativeness of the evidence that comes through when submitted through dossiers. To understand the clinical context, focusing on disease epidemiology, the clinical management, and also drug utilization, and of course association studies, focusing on safety, but also effectiveness where appropriate. We also have a strong interest in evaluating the impact of regulatory actions, and we will also integrate some methodological work along with these types of study designs. And the aim is to cover quite a broad range of regulatory areas, from orphan designation or scientific advice through to authorization and post-authorization monitoring. This slide shows some of the ongoing studies within the DARWIN EU network at the moment. For example, there's a complex study looking at mortality rates and other outcomes in people with severe asthma overall, using real-world evidence, but also in a select group of people that are eligible for a clinical trial in question that's submitted as part of a marketing authorization application. We also have simpler studies, such as drug utilization studies of prescription opioids, to really understand what's happening in Europe, given the challenges that you faced here in the USA. And also another example would be one of the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines against severe COVID outcomes in some of the new variants. And importantly, these studies are designed to allow them to be repeated when we have more recent data available or as we increase the available data sources that we have available to us. So in Europe, we face quite a large challenge in terms of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity as a result of differences in clinical practice between countries, but also differences in terms of how data is generated, some of the coding schemes used, and of course, data quality. And that's where we believe using a common data model has benefits in standardizing the data, but also to allow tools to be built and to run on top to try and get a handle of how good data quality is. Other aspects that we face challenges for is organization of the network due to different ethical and governance requirements. An example of that would be the types of approvals that are required to be able to execute studies that can range from a few weeks in one data source to several months in another. And also implementing quality control procedures consistently amongst very heterogeneous data sources and data partners consistently. And all this impacts on the speed. So therefore, one of the important areas that we increasingly learning is to make feasibility assessments better and more efficient, and to try and embed some of the iterative learning through the conduct of studies, because we're still very much in the establishment phase, in order to improve on all of these aspects. So in terms of future perspectives, we're currently in year 2, and over the next 3 years, we're looking to scale up, not only to increase the number of data sources that are onboarded to the network. So by the end of year 5, we should have 40 data partners. But it may be that some of those data partners themselves are small networks of multiple databases. So the number of data sources may be greater than 40. But also to scale up on the number of studies that we're conducting. So this year we have a target of 16 studies. And by the end of year 5, we're looking to conduct over 140 studies per year. Another future perspective we're quite excited to see how it develops in Europe is something called the European Health Data Space. And this is going to be new legislation to facilitate not just the primary use of healthcare data, but also the secondary use of healthcare data amongst all the member states. By basically making all member states having a health data access body to facilitate the process of access to data, either direct access through a pseudonymized route or federated access, and importantly to try and improve the ability to link data sets, which, as we've discussed in the previous session, has become really, really important and valuable. And that's everything I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we will turn it to Melissa, who is joining us virtually.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Okay. I'm very happy to be with you here today to provide some of my perspectives from our experiences here in Canada. I am joining you virtually today from Ottawa. And before I begin, I just want to note that I'm a woman with long blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a green shirt. So to set the stage, I'm going to first kind of contextualize the history of how Health Canada ended up having a domestic distributed data network that it could leverage for research queries. So this begins with our former Drug Safety and Effectiveness Network, or DSEN, as it was referred to. So the DSEN was established by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and Health Canada and was funded by Health Canada between 2009 until late 2022. And this network generated research produced by 4 research teams to support Health Canada and other Canadian decision makers on areas such as targeted oversight and decision-making related to the safety and effectiveness of human drug products. So over the course of its time, the network addressed more than 100 research queries just for Health Canada alone. Now, one of the research teams, the Canadian Network for Observational Drug Effect Studies, or CNODS, adapted the FDA Sentinel Common Data Model through DSEN query for use in Canada to see if they could answer decision maker questions more efficiently. So the CNODS version of the Sentinel CEM, that includes data centers across 6 Canadian provinces, has the ability to provide rapid analyses of prescription medication use, patient characteristics, apparent indications for drug therapy, clinical outcomes, and health service use following drug treatment. So initially, there was a pilot project that was conducted with 3 demonstration studies. And these pilots were really to make sure that CDM data quality was there and to understand the limitations of the CDM within the Canadian context. So these studies explored adverse effects associated with new molecular entities approved by Health Canada in 2015, looked at the use of oral anticoagulants, and also adverse events following the new use of statins. So after these pilots, which were very successful from our perspective, collaborative queries were also initiated, including one with FDA and other partners on the utilization of angiotensin II receptor blockers following nitrosamine recalls. And since that time, we've also had a number of collaborative queries that have been initiated through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities. So through ICMRA, there is a COVID-19 real-world evidence and observational studies working group that is currently chaired by EMA and Health Canada. And this has included a number of technical work streams, including one that focused on building cohorts of COVID-19 patients. So through this work stream that is chaired by Health Canada, FDA, and EMA have worked together to conduct a number of collaborative queries where we in Canada have leveraged the CNODES common data model. So these have included a query on the utilization of steroids in COVID-19 patients that was led by EMA, and where comparable studies were undertaken by FDA, Health Canada, and our respective research teams, as well as a collaborative study between all 3 regulators on the natural history of coagulopathy in COVID-19 patients that was led by FDA. So that's just a little snapshot. So before I end my remarks, I do want to note that in terms of current status, so we conducted a 2019 evaluation of the DSEN, and it really highlighted that there were some limitations to the current network. And so based on this, it was decided that the program would be better suited under a new hosted model. And so that is where the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health comes into play. So CADTH is one of our 2 HTA bodies in Canada, and a new program was launched under them in September of 2022. So this post-market drug evaluation program that is now funded by Health Canada, similar to the DSEN previously, has established a new network of research teams called CoLab, of which CNODES is now a core network partner. So through this program, Health Canada and CADTH are continuing to work together to explore potential enhanced collaboration with regulatory partners, including in areas where we could further leverage common data models. So discussions are ongoing for this, building on some of the successful collaborations that we've had in the past, looking at topics of mutual interest. So with that, I'll end my remarks there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. All right. Next, we have with us, excuse me, Dave, who will be our last discussant for our opening remarks.
Good morning, and thank you all for having me here. I am David Money. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for the Office of Pharmacovigilance and Epidemiology in Surveillance and Epidemiology at FDA. I'm here today in my role as the Rapporteur for the International Council of Harmonization's M14 guideline on post-marketing safety studies using real-world data. I'm a white male in my mid-50s, wearing a United States Public Health Service uniform. My hair is very short. I like to say I fired it before it could quit. I've been asked to provide an overview of the international collaboration and perspectives on the analysis of big data and the use for regulatory purposes in public health. I know I'm preaching to the choir in this audience, but epidemiology has long been a mainstay of post-marketing pharmacovigilance and safety evaluations. And because of this, regulators have recognized this utility for quite a while and have written a number of guidelines and guidances to guide sponsors of drug companies in the development, planning, and submission of pharmacoepidemiology studies for regulatory purposes. However, there's been a lot of guidelines put out by a lot of agencies, and there's no international harmonized guideline to date. This can create some inefficiencies for both regulators and sponsors. And ICH has recognized this through a series of efforts that there are benefits to developing a harmonized guideline. And this may result in decreased review effort, decreased time until sufficient data accrues for regulatory action, or increase the likelihood of transportability of protocol studies or results across regulators for post-marketing safety. So with that as the background, I'd like to provide an overview of this project and how we got to where we are today. And importantly, make sure that you all know that there's an opportunity for participation in this process and feedback as we work towards getting this guideline out and available for everybody in the public. So the process started in 2019. There was an initial reflection paper discussing the need for harmonization. The document focused on the technical requirements for studies and outlined benefits of developing this globally harmonized approach. One of the other goals of the project was identified to help facilitate the use of real-world data for regulatory decision-making and move that along. Following the publication of their work, the Pharmacoepidemiology Discussion Group was formed in 2021, and they really took a closer look at the technical requirements for pharmacoepi studies. They tried to look at all the technical areas that are covered or needed in pharmacoepi studies and how many guidances were addressing those issues, right, to find the areas which were most amenable to harmonization. It also helped to, I like to think of it as developing our table of contents. They really set up the work for us on this is the scope of M14 and what an internationally harmonized guideline would likely contain. They closed out their work by publishing a concept paper that outlined the technical requirements for the studies. It also laid out some of the goals and potential benefits of the work, including increasing confidence for pharmacovigilance activities with real-world data, accelerate the accumulation of safety data, and promote the sharing of post-marketing safety information across different regulatory agencies to lead to better decision-making. So finally, this is where ICH M14 comes in April 2022. M14 consists of 22 international regulators or industry groups working on a harmonized document to describe the general principles on the plan, design, and analysis of these pharmacoepi studies for safety assessments of drugs, biologics, and vaccines. If you'd like additional detail on the background of all this work, this is all published and available online at the ICH website under the M14 page. You can find a concept paper, our business plan, and a work plan that gives a high-level overview of our timeline for the process. So M14 convened, and we picked up where the Pharmacoepi Discussion Group left off. We picked up on their topic areas for harmonization, and went out to all of the guidelines that were available at the time. Between the two time periods of 2021 and now, there's been a number of additional real-world data, real-world evidence guidelines published, especially in the space of real-world evidence for efficacy. We like to say that good epi is good epi, and it's just the context in which it's used that it is the big difference. And so M14 is acknowledging, and we realize our work has applicability into this other space as well for the evidence side of life, but we really are trying to focus the guideline just on real-world evidence for post-marketing safety studies. So when we picked up, we took all of our available guidelines and repeated much of the process started by the Pharmacoepi Discussion Group with identifying all of the topical areas that were covered by those guidelines, and then within each topical area, harmonizing the content of each one of those into sections into the M14 guideline. This section by section formed the initial draft of the document, and this was circulated to all of the participating members for review and comment in June 2023. As you can imagine, there was interest in comments. We received about 600 comments from all of the groups, and we are currently working through all of those. We anticipate taking the next step to go to step 2, which would be submission to ICH, and then a public release early in 2024. I would encourage anyone who has any interest whatsoever in that guideline and that effort to go to the ICH webpage. It will be posted. There will be instructions for providing comment. And once we receive those, probably in the middle of next year, we will be working through everybody's comments to develop a final harmonized guideline. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and pass it on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel, Melissa, and David for the opening remarks. Next, we're going to turn it to a short discussion. We've got a little over 9 minutes for that, so I encourage our audience members to submit questions via the Slido function, which we will incorporate into our discussion, time permitting. Hopefully, we can get through any and all questions we receive in the next few minutes that we have. So, this question really is for the three of our panelists here today. What future opportunities are there from your perspective for learning internationally across systems? And as we've heard, there are, and as we know, even within our work that we're doing here at Duke Margolis, within my real world evidence portfolio, there's a growing amount and steadily growing amount of guidance being released across international agencies. So what are future opportunities or maybe short-term wins or gains that we can think about or anticipate in the near term? And that's for any of our panelists.
Perhaps I'd just kick off a little bit. I'm a practical person, and so all of our international groups come together on a pretty regular basis to discuss safety concerns, major issues that we're having to deal with. I tend to learn by doing, right? And I think we find these commonalities among all of our groups and identify projects that are of mutual benefit to everybody. And you have heard a number of these today, right? A lot of work around COVID-19. We had the nitrosamines, just as 2 examples. We gain experience in doing these projects and how our data systems work and how our regulation works together by working through all of those types of things. I can say from my experience on M14, there's a great desire for people to come together and work on these projects together. And so I think the learning just tends to follow from that desire to want to work together and work through those efforts.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to come in next. So I think there's many opportunities to collaborate. The EMA and the FDA already have active cluster meetings on a periodic basis to discuss different elements. We also, colleagues from the Coordination Center have also recently been to visit colleagues through the Sentinel Initiative, and I think that exchange of information and regular communication, I think it will be really important moving forward. And then there's the other opportunity to collaborate on potential studies of mutual interest as well. I think once these networks are set up and mature, we need to find a way of how we may be able to tackle some of the harder questions. And I think there's a real opportunity to do this, starting to be a bit more of a global perspective as well. So I'm quite excited about some of those potentials.
Thank you.
And I will echo both the thoughts of David and Daniel. I think we've really built a good foundation in terms of our collaborative efforts. So for example, we've learned a lot through the ICMA Real World Evidence Working Group as to how to work together. What are some of the barriers? We noticed early on timeliness could be a factor. How could we address that moving forward? And also, in terms of some of those relationships that we have built, for example, through, the cluster meetings, we have another ICH reflection paper that was recently released for public consultation, looking at, the planning and reporting of studies that are using real world data and real world evidence. So we're trying to leverage each other's expertise, experience to learn together and come together to try and see if we can, further kind of hash out some of these principles and converge wherever possible. So I think we've done a lot of work together in this space, and it's definitely continuing.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And we encourage our audience to continue to submit questions using the Slido function that we have available. My next question, and some of you have touched on this already, in fact. Melissa, you mentioned ICMRA or ICMRA, and you've mentioned ICH. So how are agencies including Health Canada and FDA and EMA envisioning working together, moving into the future around international harmonization, furthering active surveillance through uses of real-world data and evidence-generating systems that can support regulatory decision-making? What does that look like moving forward within the context of DARWIN EU, Sentinel, or other approaches?
Maybe I can speak first, and I think it's continuing these initiatives that we have built through ICH, through ICMRA, seeing what the next steps are, but also looking towards the future. So for example, I provided the overview of how within Canada we had a research team who adapted the Sentinel CDM for the Canadian, healthcare system. We continue to have discussions. Can we do the same thing for the OMOP? Is there another way where we can better integrate in the future so that we can set up a system where we can enable these collaborative studies over time when they do, the opportunity arises, as Dave said, as well, for areas of mutual interest. So I think kind of continuing to build on those areas.
I agree with what Melissa's saying. I think there's a distinction to be made between work that's actively ongoing and will develop and what will become a formal guideline in future. Mm-hmm. And there's a bit of uncertainty as to what makes a guideline or not. The important thing is that when guidelines are periodically reviewed, that all of the new evidence and methods, whether that be from trials or real-world evidence, is also considered as to whether its relevance. But I think from a European perspective, and EMA will always sort of engage with the sort of ICH and harmonized guidelines to seek ways to try and improve and harmonize those approaches where possible. So,
I don't have a ton to add. I think the desire and the will is there, right? And and you have researchers who are doing the public health work and really trying to advance. And the systems are set up. The systems are there to enable them to do that work and to advance that. And it's just moving through the technical and the kind of the regulatory and governance issues, but those are all solvable to get the essential work done.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have a few more minutes for another question. So what are common challenges that you all encounter across these systems? And what are some approaches or avenues that you've taken to address them, especially as you're looking to improve, I imagine, population health surveillance more effectively or globally? I know you're like, where do we start with this? Yeah.
I think I presented a slide that touched on some of the challenges that we have in terms of starting to walk before we run. And I think, data quality is a big aspect that all the regulators are facing in terms of real-world evidence. And in what we're encountering in some of the databases that we are increasingly having access to, and we have open calls and consider different data sources, and not all may necessarily get into the network straight away, is to try and do a very thorough assessment of data quality to see where there are gaps and whether those gaps are importantly solvable through different approaches. And we have a way to try and almost feedback and try to fill some of those gaps. An example using the common data model, maybe the data's there, it's just not been mapped. Now that's very different to the data doesn't exist at all and needs to be collected de novo. So I think that is a big area that we are increasingly focused on.
Yeah, thank you.
I think one of the recurrent issues that the we face is both timeliness of data, and we touched on that a few times, right? Data lags can really make like evaluating an emerging safety issue for something that's very current difficult, and it restricts your opportunities and your choices, your design choices when you go out and start working on an evaluation. The other thing is really starting to work towards leveraging machine learning and AI to try and advance some of the very manual work around things like validation of outcomes. Like, not everything that we're ever going to want to look at has already been validated and ready to go for us, and trying to accelerate the process of that so we can get to at least to a semi-automated or a assisted approach to doing that, and getting reasonably comfortable with an outcome that we're going to use in a study in a reasonably quick manner, I think is essential.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we do have to move to our next session. So thank you all so much for this excellent discussion. I hope everyone has learned from it. And I will next turn it over to Garrett Hammer, who's our Research Director of Medical Product Development and Regulatory Policy at Duke Margolis, who will moderate our next session.
Thanks, friend. Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Rachel. Also to the participants in the previous session, both for their presentations and the dialogue. It is so refreshing to see. I'm not sure if people can tell it's going so smoothly, but it is so refreshing to see how well questions are coming in virtually from the audience. So please keep them coming. It's just wonderful to have that dialogue with folks both here and outside. My name is Garrett Hamre, Research Director, Medical Product Development and Regulatory Policy here at Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. I have blonde hair, wear glasses, and wearing a blue blazer today, and have never once been described as tall. This session is entitled Sentinel System and Best Operations and Coordinating Center Perspectives. And we will indeed hear from both Sentinel, the Sentinel System and the CBOC, as well as BEST with a highlight of the studies that they've undertaken this year. As a reminder, the Sentinel Operations Center is just one component of the Sentinel System, which also includes the Innovation Center and Community Building and Outreach Center. We will hear about research efforts and key activities at the Operations Center, as well as the additional centers during the session. We'll also hear from BEST, which, as a refresher, stands for Biologics Effectiveness and Safety System. I feel comfortable highlighting that again, since Dr. Woodcock, too, admitted she struggles with acronyms at times. They will talk about their high-level accomplishments from this past year and their goals for the coming year. I've got a number of presentations during this session, which means that this one actually will be cut short a bit on moderated discussion and Q&A. However, if you do have questions, if you continue to submit them into Slido, we do collect them and forward them, and certainly will incorporate time permitting. Now the fun joy of introducing our panel. Margaret Anderson, Managing Director with Deloitte Consulting. Next up will be Darren Toe, DPM, Endowed Professor at the Department of Population Medicine at Harvard Medical School and Harvard Pilgrim Health Institute. Yogi Chillarige, Senior Research Manager at Acumen. And then also John Seeger, Pharmacoepidemiologist and Chief Scientific Officer and Epidemiology at Optum. Margaret, you first. Thank you. I said I would stand up because I find it hard to sit all the day long, since in our Zoom world, I feel like I'm getting up constantly in my home office. In terms of describing myself, I have multicolored hair, big blue glasses. I call it my art of distraction for aging, and I am medium height. And I'm excited to be here. I am representing the CBOC community, and I am also with Deloitte Consulting, where I have a number of different roles. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of our federal health sector. We work with all of the federal health agencies. I also work extensively in the not-for-profit sector and previously led a national group called Faster Cures. I also wanted to, I know Mark earlier said that we could have controversial statements. It was part of the independence, and I was saying to some of the leadership that I thought it was very controversial not to have coffee here or allow us. It's one thing not to be served it, but to not let us bring it in the building.
That was a lot. So anyway, on with the presentation here. Okay, so I will be in charge of my slides here. And I'm going to start just in terms of the overview of what I'll cover today. So we'll talk a little bit about the journey. Janet, I thought, gave this wonderful overview of the conception of the Sentinel Initiative, and then really this, I thought, very enlightening perspective on how Sentinel has been used, what have we gained from it. And so I'll kind of skip some of the evolution pieces of my presentation, but wanted to say that we'll talk about the community writ large that Sentinel is both currently exposed to and communicating with, and then what our plans are for the future, the impact of that work that we've been doing in terms of community building, and then Sentinel as a national resource. So what is the CBOC, the Community Building and Outreach Center? We are really here to create a broad and active and vibrant scientific community in terms of that community's engagement with Sentinel Initiative, understanding, utilization. And we support the FDA Sentinel program in accomplishing 3 of the strategic aims that were outlined in the 5-year strategy. Those aims that are listed here: using the system to accelerate access to and broaden the use of real-world data for real-world evidence. The second being broaden the Sentinel System's user base to achieve the vision of it being a national resource. And I think, again, we heard a lot of proof points this morning already of the ability for Sentinel to serve as that national resource. And then disseminating knowledge and advancing regulatory science to encourage innovation and meet the FDA's scientific needs. These aims are reflected in the recommendations and projects that are outlined in CBOC's master plan, which I will talk a little bit more about. So the next slide is a little bit, we don't have it as a yellow brick road, but if you imagine this sort of journey on the yellow brick road, you can see, the conceptualization of CBOC and some of the different intersections that CBOC has had, or I'm sorry, the conception of Sentinel and then the CBOC journey. If you think about communications tools that existed 15 years ago, I was doing a little bit of internet research. I mean, Instagram, YouTube did not exist. Facebook was, I think, nascent at that point. A lot of the tools that now we take for granted didn't exist. So one of the things I'll talk about today is how and why our communications infrastructure needs to evolve to do that community building and sort of increase awareness. So this has a series of the milestones that we've hit along the way, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific tools that we are working with the Sentinel Initiative and all of the different partners to create awareness and understanding and use communications as a vehicle, as a tactic, if you will, to tell the story. And I think, as we started the work early on, we did a lot of listening sessions with different entities, different groups, and at times it felt that the Sentinel Initiative was a best kept secret. And so part of this is to expand within the population that needs to understand Sentinel, expand that reach and beyond. And I see, I know at the end of the day, you'll have different perspectives that will present. Anna McAllister, who's a dear friend and colleague, will give some of the patient perspective on that. And I think it's important to be kind of looking at Sentinel from a 360 perspective. So in terms of this journey, again, we'll go through it a little bit, but we all now take for granted things like websites. Well, one of the things you need to understand about a website is if you are not updating websites, if the content is static, users are not likely to come back and visit the website. And so one of the things that we're trying to pay attention to is how are we engaging with the audience? How are we making sure that the information is true, valid, correct, and current? So we'll talk a little bit about some of those tactics. One of the other ways that we all still communicate in terms of information exchange is through newsletters and kind of having information condensed to us and pushed. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly kind of sifting through my inbox and thinking, is this newsletter of value? Am I reading it, or am I just hitting delete? And if so, can I go in and unsubscribe? Well, obviously that would be the enemy of what we want in terms of CBOC and Sentinel. So we are really looking at how do we keep that newsletter vibrant? How are we telling stories? How are we sharing useful information so that people really open it, which is one of the ways that we utilize, sort of metrics to see and analytics. How is it being utilized? This shows a little bit of the numbers in terms of how many have we sent out, what's the growth of subscriber, what's the number. We are talking about a very specific population that we're trying to hit. And so one of the asks that I'll make of all of you, both in the room and virtually, is please share and disseminate the newsletter so that we can increase that subscribership. That would be, I think, a huge win if we continue to spread that information. So if you then move forward in terms of the concept of how are we growing that Sentinel community, so we're thinking about tools and services, we're thinking about the outreach mechanisms, and then how do we keep those audiences engaged? So one of the ways is webinars, trying to have very sort of pertinent, current content and get people engaged, asking questions similar to what we're doing today in this meeting. We're also looking, as I said, about the subscriber network with the newsletter, and then graphics. Now, you could say, oh, well, that doesn't sound very interesting. Well, what is a graphic doing, and how are we listening and learning in today's world? Well, a fact that I don't exactly know how they've proven it, but if you are in the field of communications and marketing, you would know that a goldfish has a retention rate of information, or they listen or pay attention to information 9 seconds, and humans 8 seconds. So we all now live in an era where we are constantly not only bombarded, but we are distracted, heavily distracted by the devices in our hands. And now, now that we're all out and about a little bit more, I'm noticing in cars, people driving with their device in their hand, or stopping and looking, because gosh, we might have missed something between stoplights. So we're trying to use things like graphics about Sentinel to tell complex stories. And so we've been creating graphics in concert with the different centers and teams to use that as a vehicle for understanding. Same thing with those webinars. And then, as I said, we're looking at the website and saying, how is it functioning? Is it up to date? And so we've been working behind the scenes to make sure that that's happening. So in terms of the different channels that we're using, we talked about trainings. I'll talk in a minute about partnerships, videos. And again, if you are on your phone, you're probably getting videos of cats and all sorts of interesting things like that. Well, how are we taking the Sentinel work and trying to make it compelling and interesting? Hot tip, I'll tell you, look at the National Human Genome Institute of NIH. They have hired some sort of social media partner who is really making their content very funny and interesting. And so, I think we're coming at it from the perspective of how can we work within the, color within the lines, but really make it engaging. And I have asked Eric Green, the head of that institute, how he's doing it, and he said they're just having fun with it. So I'm not saying that we're going to add cats to the Sentinel site. I know the leadership are probably cringing back there, but we are, again, we're working in this world where the entirety of our society are communicating and getting information very differently. So we're trying to be agile and think about that. And then, as I said, making sure that that website is up to date. So one of the areas that I mentioned is collaboration and partnership. And I wanted to touch on this briefly. What are some of the benefits of these partnerships? So we have been not only doing outreach to our audience, we're looking to expand to new groups and cultivate collaborations that can help us do that. So public health partnerships, and I would say partnerships in general, have been prevalent among communication efforts in recent years. And if you think about any, public health messaging, especially, let's think back a short, brief time to COVID, and the way that we were receiving our COVID information from community sites, from clinics, from physician offices, from our established public health channels, from our public health leaders, it was a multitude of sources, And so one of the things we're looking at in this partnership model is, where are there different opportunities for collaboration? And so there have been some initial steps that we've taken in working with leadership to understand what are some of those opportunities in terms of some of the federal health, sort of entities and agencies, and what are opportunities for both them to have a deeper understanding of the Sentinel Initiative, but work on different collaborations. So I'll leave it at that in terms of just kind of touching on it. More to come for sure in that area, but we really feel like these joint efforts are going to make a big difference in terms of reaching different audiences and cohorts and kind of expand that reach, which is the ultimate goal. And then in terms of the path ahead. So this is my last slide. I will tell you that we are really looking at, as I've been talking about, public health communication trends. I mean, I've been speaking at a more macro level about communication trends, and some of them being admittedly silly, but it is merging into the world that we're living in terms of public health, biomedical science. And so 3 trends that I wanted to point out: spurring action in communities using digital channels. The second being, how do we push the needle, again, in appropriate ways, on effective communication? And then last, using technological progress to optimize communications. And you'll see the last bullet, and I think that will make our leadership happy, which is proceeding with some caution. So I don't want them to think that all of a sudden cats are going to appear on the Sentinel site, but I did want to just point out that we're competing, and so the team at CBOC is thinking about this, working with all the different centers, and really grounding it in public health messaging, public health communication, and working with leadership to try to enhance that for all of you. So thank you so much. I look forward to the other presentations and conversation. Thank you.
Darren.
Good morning. I am Darren To. I am a Southeast Asian man, black hair, brown eyes, wearing my glasses in blue blazer. People say that I look like my son, but that is not going to help you because you don't know what he looks like. So I'm going to do a progress report on what we accomplished at the Sentinel Operations Center in the last fiscal year, which ran from October of 2022 to September 2023. So these are our disclaimers. So I'm presenting on behalf of a very large network of collaborators, many of whom provide data to the Sentinel Common Data Model. And I'm also presenting on behalf of our very dedicated staff at the Sentinel Operations Center. So this is a snapshot of the analysis that we did last year. So there were a number of ways to create this metric. So we decided to present the number of analytic packages that we sent to the data partners last year. So overall, we sent out more than 60 packages. And you can see that we send the packages to the primary Sentinel distributed database. And you can also see the breakdown by type of analysis. We also did a dozen descriptive analysis with our additional electronic health record data partners. So I should note that these numbers don't tell the full story. For example, within a package, we might be looking at multiple medications or multiple product outcome pairs. So if anything, this is an underestimate of what we accomplished last year. And on your right-hand side, these are the materials that we shared publicly last year with the community. And a big part of the Sentinel system is the Active Risk Identification and Analysis System, or the ARIA system. So there's a very specific section within the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Section 5050, that says that if there is a safety issue that requires post-market surveillance, and if FDA determines that ARIA could look at these safety issues, then FDA would monitor these safety issues within the ARIA system. It's only when the system is considered insufficient, then would FDA issue a post-market requirement to the sponsor. So this is a table that we created since 2016 when Dr. Woodcock said that Sentinel became a fully functional system. So we have sort of completed a number of what people might call PMR replacement studies within ARIA, and a number of them are ongoing. And in addition to this very specific section within the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FDA can and is using the ARIA system to look at additional safety issues. So this is one of the 3 examples that I'm going to show today. So this is on upadacitinib for its indication on Crohn's disease. So FDA is using the ARIA system to monitor the association between the long-term use of this drug with select health outcomes of interest. This is on the same drug, but for another indication. And this is for baricitinib, which is approved for alopecia areata. And FDA, again, is using the ARIA system to monitor the association between this drug and a number of outcomes. So we spoke a lot about signal identification activities during the earlier section. So I'm going to provide 3 examples that we accomplished last year. So the first one is semaglutide, but more specifically, the version that is approved for type 2 diabetes. Ozempic is the brand name for this version of semaglutide. So we did a signal identification analysis using core design with propensity score matching. And this is a closer look of the analysis that we did. So we use a method called tree scan, which allows us to look at health outcomes at different levels of granularity. So for this analysis, we looked at more than 80,000 non-pregnancy and non-cancer outcomes based on the ICD-10 coding system. We did a one-to-one matched propensity score analysis. So we observed a number of alerts, but when we look at the alerts, we concluded that these alerts or potential safety signals were either labeled adverse events or comorbid conditions for people who might be using this product, not just for diabetes, but also for weight loss. So the overall analysis concluded that none of these alerts require further follow-up. And the second example is looking at a product, but between a biosimilar product and its originator product. So this is filgrastim, which is a drug that is used to stimulate production of white blood cells, usually used after cancer treatment. So we also did a cohort analysis with propensity score matched design, and we did not observe any safety alerts that would require further follow-up. The third example was iranumab, which is a product that is approved for the prevention of migraine. And for these signal identification activities, we use a different design, the self-controlled risk interval design, which is comparing the same individuals but different time points. And for this particular analysis, we did observe something that we did not expect. So this is all of the 80,000 or so outcomes that we looked at. So the alert was for other specified cerebral vascular disease. And as a follow-up of this alert, we pull up the claims history of the patient using the tool that we call patient episode profile retrieval. So after reviewing the claims history of the patients, FDA concluded that there's a very low likelihood that this particular outcome was associated with the drug of interest. So overall, through these 3 analyses that we completed, we have a number of observations. First is that the method that we use is doing a pretty good job at minimizing false positives. So for each analysis, we screened for more than 80,000 outcomes, but FDA was not flooded with a large number of potentially false negative to follow up on. And what it also says is that with the resources that we have, this approach is scalable, meaning that we will be able to look at more and more of this analysis in future years. Hopefully, if we get a chance to provide an update again next year, we have more to share. So this was an example that Dr. Woodcock mentioned earlier today. how Sentinel's data are being used to help FDA make certain regulatory decisions. So since Dr. Uko did a very good job explaining the situation and telling the story, so I'm not going to go over it now. So I will focus on sort of more forward-looking type of discussion. So earlier this year, FDA and our colleagues at the Operations Center published this study, which is to summarize what we have learned in the first 6 years of the ARIA system. So I will draw your attention to two of the tables in the paper. The first one is summarizing the reasons for what we call ARIA insufficiency. So this is a situation where the system was considered not sufficient to address certain safety issues. And if you look at the top, you see that the main reason was that the system did not have clinical data that will be necessary for specific safety issues. And one of the ways to address this gap is to bring in even more electronic health record data into the ARIA system. And as mentioned, this is a main goal of the Sentinel Innovation Center. Because there's a later session that will focus on this, so I'm not going to talk more because there will be more detail that will be shared later. And another table is looking at ARIA insufficiency by health outcomes. And at the top are pregnancy and perinatal outcomes. And so at the earlier stage of the ARIA system, we did not have mom-baby link data because to look at pregnancy or perinatal outcomes, we want to look at prenatal exposure and then infant outcomes. So being able to link mom and baby's data together is important. And this gap was filled in 2018 when Sentinel created the mom-baby linked table. So if you look at the data that we have today, right now we have data from about 11 million live birth deliveries with mom and baby link data. And we have recently updated our system to allow us to identify other pregnancy outcomes that don't result in live birth, for example, spontaneous abortions. So this further enhances our ability to look at pregnancy-associated exposure and outcomes. So I think that this is probably one of the largest data sources in the country on pregnant people. So for the Prescription Drug User Fee Act 6 commitment, which ended in 2022, there were a number of commitments related to Sentinel, which was a part of the larger effort to further enhance and modernize FDA's drug safety surveillance system. So this is a report card. I'm happy to report that Sentinel met all the commitments. But looking ahead, so we are now in PDUFA 7, and there are two topics that are related to Sentinel. The first one, again, is focusing on pregnancy safety. And this is a screenshot of the commitments related to this particular topic. In the middle column here are the demonstration projects that we are going to launch very soon in Sentinel. The focus of these demonstration projects were to compare and contrast the advantages and limitations of pregnancy exposure registries and studies that are done with data that Sentinel has, which are secondary data sources from insurance claims or electronic health records. And as part of the commitment, there was also a workshop that was held at this very location earlier this year. The workshop was focusing on optimizing the use of post-approval pregnancy safety studies. So Sentinel data contributed to two presentations, one by FDA and the other by the Sentinel Operations Center. The second topic within PDUFA 7 that is related to Sentinel is about negative controls, which is, again, a larger effort to further enhance the methods related to real-world data studies. So we are launching a study very soon within the Innovation Center to use a newly developed method that would allow us to automatically and empirically identify negative controls combined with expert review the goal is to be able to build a tool that we can then use routinely within the Sentinel system to examine the robustness of our analysis. And this is the screenshot on this particular section and the timeline associated with it. And as part of the commitment, there was also a workshop that was held earlier this year. So a collaborator from the Innovation Center presented at the workshop. So finally, I'm almost done. So as you recall, during the pandemic, early on, Sentinel pivoted very quickly to help FDA better understand the natural history of COVID-19 and treatments associated with COVID-19. So we have talked about a number of projects in earlier sessions. So I'm just going to highlight two studies here. One is that the Sentinel data contributed to FDA's new drug application review of Paxlovid. And the data that we provided was related to drugs that might interact with Paxlovid. And we found that people who are using Paxlovid had a large number of medications that could potentially interact with Paxlovid. And this is a study focusing on COVID-19 and pregnant population. And this is part of the international collaboration that we just spoke about in the previous sessions. So we have completed a number of studies within this project. And so here is a project that evaluated the impact of COVID-19 on average infant outcomes between pregnant individual with COVID versus pregnant individual without COVID. And overall, we didn't find increased risk of major infant outcomes that we looked at among pregnant people with COVID-19 compared to those without. But there was some slight, sort of slightly higher number of infants with congenital malformation and low birth weight in women that were classified to have more severe condition. So the work I presented here would not have been possible without contribution from many, many individuals. So I'm just going to show this slide and this slide, and you can pause the video when it becomes available to appreciate the contribution of these individuals. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Darren. Thank you. Yogi, good sir. Okay, let's see if this, okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Yogi from Acumen LLC. For the people who need to recognize me, I'm a South Asian male. I have black hair. I have a dark blue suit, though again, as Darren mentioned, I don't know how much a dark blue suit will help you in identifying me at this place. So I am here in my role as the lead for Acumen's efforts as the Claims Data Coordinating Center for the BEST initiative. I'm also responsible for overseeing other work that Acumen does with FDA, both on the CBER and CDER sides. And today I'm going to be primarily focusing my presentation and thoughts on the BEST initiative overall, the work that we've been conducting over the past few years, and with a focus really on the advancements and improvements that we've had in this last 1 year. So as a quick agenda, I'll give you a short summary of the CBER Active Surveillance Program, the BEST Data Network. Following that, we'll discuss some of the improvements to the network and the capacity expansion that has taken place in the last year. Go over a quick summary of the surveillance activities that we conducted, and then give an idea of what the goals are for the coming year. So the CBER's active surveillance program is actually large. It includes a number of different partners. There's a long history of collaboration with federal partners, such as the Veterans Administration, CDC, and of course the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And in that interaction, Acumen's been involved in that process where FDA and CMS have conducted a number of different studies for the safety and effectiveness of medical products. But the BEST initiative, in the way that it is currently set up, was launched in 2018. I think there was a pilot in 2017, but it was launched in 2018. And
initially included a certain number of, a few set of partners who came in with data. There was IBM with the market scan data, Acumen came in with the Blue Health Intelligence data. But it was in 2020, interestingly, in the middle of the madness, when the system was expanded to bring on additional data partners, as well as scientific collaborators for this program. And so we have the United Health Group data through the Optum Group, Carelon Research, working with IQVIA, as well as the CVS Health Aetna Group, that all brought in data to the system. And with that expansion required the need to kind of move to a distributed data network. So let's talk about that. So the best claims distributed data network uses, collaborators maintain their data in this model called the OMOP model, or the Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership model. Data are, I think most people here know why the CDMs are used in general when you're looking at a distributed data network, so I will skip right past all of that bit and say data are normally updated monthly. This was actually pretty essential for a lot of CBER's needs when it comes to things like vaccine surveillance and active surveillance requiring relatively frequent updates of data. And in some cases, data are updated even more frequently than monthly. And that is where I think some of the exceptions to the use of a CDM can come into play. So there is a certain burden which comes in with having to translate all of the data into the common data model. And so when data updates can be conducted rapidly and much more frequently, there are benefits to working outside of the common data model. And a large part of what we worked on as a coordinating center during the phase where we really required to get a lot of results out early was to set up specific research analytic file structures that people could use and convert their data into without having to go through the entire common data model when needed. There's a whole set of information that I can give you on the size of the network, et cetera, which I will leave because I believe Dr. Lloyd from FDA will be talking about it at the later session this afternoon. So what exactly were the kind of network capacity expansions that we conducted? Steve Anderson, Dr. Anderson talked about this to a little extent earlier on. The first part, of course, is so I'll try and provide some rationale for why some of these steps were taken. So first, with the immunization systems, when you're doing vaccine effectiveness research, and in some cases even vaccine safety research, not knowing whether someone was vaccinated or not is going to be a huge problem. Now, we know when someone is vaccinated because we see a claim, but when we don't see a claim, it doesn't necessarily mean they've not been vaccinated. And so integrating data from immunization systems, which also capture this information, really enhanced the capacity to do the kind of work that we needed to do when it came to vaccine safety as well as, and more importantly, vaccine effectiveness, where you need to be able to identify individuals who were not vaccinated and what their likelihood of getting COVID was. Second, and so in this year, that was one of the other expansions that occurred. That is something that we will continue to do. And while initially the goal was to get the COVID-19 vaccine information, that is now being expanded, hopefully, to get additional information for other vaccines. The second area where we tried to expand data access was really more in the nature of medical records. So we've always had access to medical records in the best network through each individual data partner. One of the things that we've been trying to move towards, though, is to be able to get access to those records a lot faster than we normally do. Retrieval of records takes time, and the idea is to, given that a lot of times these records are being brought in to evaluate a safety signal, you want to cut time as much as possible. And so we piloted a modified process for outreach for records. We improved that pilot process suggests that we have an improved return rate, moderate, 10% more, let's say, but a substantially improved time in response. So when we earlier would get maybe 20% of all returned records within the first 3 weeks of request, we're now looking at about 50%, which rapidly increases our capacity to respond to these requests. While that was talking about how we expanded data access, this section is more focused on with the data that we have, what are the kind of infrastructure changes that we can make to be able to, again, do additional work. So back in 2018, IBM worked with FDA to develop the best pregnancy algorithm, which was focused around identifying pregnancies and various types of pregnancy outcomes, as well as gestational age at time of outcome in claims data. And so we implemented that algorithm across all data partners, but then took it to the next step, which is to conduct the mother-infant linkage, again, to support the capacity to be able to do studies on maternal use of any kind of biologic. The other thing that did happen over the last year is in the first 2 years, like since 2020, the first 2 years of the pandemic, and the expansion of the network, a large part of the focus was on doing active surveillance, rapid cycle analysis, sequential testing, and quick responses to those. In the last year, we've spent more time developing the framework to be able to do more in-depth studies. So we've been able to do cohort studies that use propensity score methods. We've been able to implement self-controlled case series studies across the network, and that is going to be part of the development of the capacities that we'll be working on for the next, in the coming years as well. Okay, so that's the area that was talking about the expansions. Let's take a look at the kind of changes or the kind of analyses that we did conduct. I'll provide a very quick summary of the surveillance activities. Again, Dr. Gruber from FDA will be providing a lot more detail on this in the afternoon session. So as a quick summary, as would be expected, the primary focus this year still remained COVID-19 and COVID-19 products. But as a result, both of emergent situations, like in the case of the Mpox outbreak last year, as well as just a general expansion of the scope of the work that can be done with this network, we started looking at other products as well. So I'll talk about the COVID work in a little more detail, but the thing that's pretty important there is that in addition to just focusing on safety-related work, we started expanding out into areas of effectiveness as well as understanding disease burden, and the primary reason for that is to help contextualize the estimates of safety risk or of the effectiveness risk, effectiveness estimates that we generate from these analyses. So when we looked at COVID-19 studies, we had near real-time monitoring for the pediatric vaccines as well as the bivalent boosters. These were sequential analyses that were run multiple times with monthly updates of data. But we also had follow-up studies that responded to signals that were identified either in our surveillance framework or through other active surveillance systems in the US. So again, I believe Dr. Anderson's referenced this before, but we had a signal identified in the CDC surveillance system that suggested there were risks of stroke following the bivalent booster in the elderly population. We conducted a pretty in-depth self-controlled case series study that not only looked at just the use of the COVID-19 vaccine, the bivalent booster, but also the concomitant use of the bivalent booster with the influenza vaccine, and did not really find any conclusive evidence to suggest that there is a risk of stroke in the elderly population associated, at least for the elderly, with the COVID vaccine. As I said, we moved also into areas of vaccine effectiveness, and there's been I've outlined them as 2 studies, but really the second one is a range of different studies, which Dr. Peatlock from Optum will talk about in the afternoon session. This is my making sure everybody stays for the afternoon session bit. But with the CMS data, we looked at the nursing home population and the population that are in long-term care to try and understand what the effects of or how effective the primary series and the original booster were, while in the case of the larger network that has the private insurer data, we looked at the younger populations, and we looked at the community-dwelling younger populations to look at how effective the vaccines were. And as I mentioned, the final piece there is understanding, while we always look at what is the risk of a vaccine, what is the benefit of the vaccine, one of the benefits of the vaccine outside of just preventing the disease is preventing other knock-on effects of the disease. And so understanding or contextualizing that risk with the benefits requires us to understand what the risks are associated with the disease. And so we looked at adverse events after COVID-19. We've looked at understanding how we can identify MIS-C, which is the multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, in claims data, and how well we can also characterize long COVID in claims data. And the idea there, again, is focused on getting a better understanding of what the effects of the disease are that are hopefully prevented by getting vaccinated. I'm not sure how much time I have left, Garrett.
About a minute.
Okay, then I will just skip past the other biologic surveillance activities and say, looking ahead, Steve mentioned this, there's 3 new vaccines that are out there, or at least new formulations of existing vaccines. In addition to them being approved for various age groups, as I've got up there, you'll notice that a lot of them are approved for people who would, or a lot of people would qualify for each of these vaccines. And so in addition to understanding what is the safety or effectiveness of each independent vaccine, there is also a lot of interest in understanding what happens if you're getting 2 of them on the same day, which likely will happen because nobody wants to go back 3 times. Well, maybe someone does, but still. And the other area really is we've built this mother-infant linked population now, and there is, for instance, a RSV vaccine that's approved for pregnant individuals. There are other biologics that are being used in pregnant individuals that we would want to study, and this would be another area of expansion that we anticipate. And lastly, we'll keep working on doing better on how exactly to identify risk as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All you, John.
All right, good morning. Welcome everyone in the room and everyone online. I'm John Seeger. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for Epidemiology at Optum, and I'm also an adjunct faculty at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm a white male in his mid-50s with a receded hairline, and I'm wearing a dark suit jacket and red tie. I'd like to share some perspectives on FDA BEST from what I call the ground up. And I have a picture on my slide of the office for Optum in Boston, and we're located in the Fenway Park neighborhood, and you can see Fenway Park and the Boston skyline. And I really appreciated the history lesson from this morning with Dr. Janet Woodcock and the FDA leadership about sort of how Sentinel and BEST came to be, because it really is a remarkable paradigm shift. And it has to do with framing both questions and answers in the language of claims. And thinking about the strengths and limitations of claims data. Claims data have this almost unlimited combinations of codes, and those codes represent drugs, biologics, diagnoses, and procedures. And not just the individual codes, the combinations and the timing of those codes can lead to inferences. And it leads to inferences and the ability to answer almost any question that you can ask. But that pluripotency comes with some problems. Because there's almost an unlimited range of questions that can be asked and answered, there's also an almost unlimited a number of ways to go wrong using claims data. And we've heard some of that, and some of the ways that claims data can be enhanced. Some of the standard study designs in epidemiology, case control, cohort, self-controlled case series, self-controlled risk interval, and all of that along with the standard programming and common data models, help provide guardrails so that you don't make the wrong inferences from the analyses you conduct, but there are still ways to go wrong. And the metadata that claims represent actually has this underlying clinical interaction between patients and their healthcare system, and claims for the FDA's mission represent a really uniquely American dialect of those underlying medical interactions. So what Optum brings to FDA Best is pharmacoepidemiology expertise. Me and my team have 25 years or more of experience conducting pharmacoepidemiology. We have approximately 40 people across Optum who are involved in getting the data that goes into the things that have been talked about for Sentinel and BEST. And the really nice thing about this is that we are situated within the Optum data ecosystem. And that provides for this human interface between the regulators and the data itself, so that we can conduct analyses using regulatory grade analytic programming, and we can use the data in its native format that allows us to do creative things with the data to answer the questions. We like to call this data with benefits. The Optum data ecosystem is a slide showing both the claims and the electronic medical records that we have available to us, and how comprehensive it is. We have data coming in from across the United States. It's not necessarily the same representative population. It's based on the data sources that come to Optum. And it's across age groups and genders. And it keeps changing. It keeps growing. Every day, healthcare happens, every hour of every day. And the metadata that we have available to us of those healthcare interactions is updated. And some of the processing to update it leads to batching and can lead to lags that we've talked about. But sitting within the data ecosystem itself gives us ability to find places where we can speed up steps, and Yogi and others have talked about that. It's something that we keep working on to make sure that we can provide actionable insight to the regulators at a time that's useful for them. Yet we have this ability to go beyond the data itself through electronic medical records or old-fashioned paper medical records, or linkages such as with the IIS, the Immunization Information Systems. People like to say, anything that can happen within a data set will happen because the data is so large. I like to also say anything that can happen will happen, and also some things that can't happen will happen. And it takes somebody inside the data to be able to figure out how that occurred. So I'd like to draw some conclusions for Optum and the FDA Best. Optum provides boots on the ground within the data system, founded in the science of epidemiology, but we are connected to the data source. And a few years back, Ken Rothman had this paper describing what he called the rift, or the growing rift between epidemiologists and their data, and Optum really does bridge that rift. We help with the inferences through direct connection to the data, so that instead of embodying results in a single number, a single effect measure, or even worse, a single p-value, what we can do is provide all of the source tabulations that really allow the reader and the user of the data to believe and feel comfortable that what you're describing actually occurred. So we call this a foundation for fact-based decision making. Thank you all very much.
Well, as expected, this did take up the full allotted time, but I did want to thank you all. It's both a great session in and of itself. It's always fun to get into the operational pieces, look under the hood. It is always surprising and almost shocking to see the continual data and infrastructural growth, and then also Margaret, the community engagement and communications piece can never be forgotten. Thank you for putting it in a manner that, frankly, all of us have to understand because we're all being bombarded in the same ways all the time. And it also, Yogi, to your point, sets up really wonderfully for the afternoon session. We're going to break now, starting at 1:05 on the dot. So thanks for folks here that are going to kind of run in and run out, and folks online. We promise we'll be right back with you at 1:05. Thank you so much.